This is Justine Spargrove recording Chapter 1, Mental Health and Mental Illness for Learning Plan 5 in Nursing Health Promotions. All right, our objectives today are to identify Maslow's hierarchy of needs, define mental health, define mental illness, define stress, list general adaptation syndrome stages, define anxiety, and list the levels of anxiety. So, the concepts of mental health and mental illness are defined by an individual's culture. Culture and religious beliefs can influence how a society views and treats mental health and mental illness. So some examples would be like evil spirits or supernatural or magical powers entering someone's body. They may quote unquote cure the person with maybe like an exorcism or beatings or starvation or a torturous means to purge the body of unwanted forces. So that may be considered normal depending on the person's culture. And because there are a wide array of differences, there can be multiple definitions of mental health and mental illness. Now, Maslow identified a hierarchy of need. So this is in your book on page 3. So Maslow's hierarchy of needs starts with the most basic at the bottom with physiological. And once you meet that level, those physiological needs, then you look into safety. And then someone's got to be able to fulfill that safety before going to love and belonging, and then to esteem, and then self-actualization. So you have to be able to meet each one of those before moving on to that next essential pillar, to meet or fulfill your highest potential for self-actualization. Now, mental health, the definition here for mental health is actually from our mental health book by Townsend's definition. So this is what definition we're going to use. So mental health is defined as a successful adaptation to stressors from the internal or external environment, evidenced by thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that are age appropriate and congruent with local and cultural norms. So that is the definition we will be using. Now, mental illness, again, is from our Townsend's book. So the definition for mental illness is defined as maladaptive responses to stressors from the internal or external environment, evidenced by thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that are incongruent with the local and cultural norms and interfere with the individual's social, occupational, or physical functioning. So now we got an interference. So let's look at our physical and psychological responses to stress. Now that we know what mental illness is, we're going to move into stress. So Hans Seeley defines stress as the state, well, basically the state manifested by specific syndrome, which consists of all the non-specifically induced changes with biological system. So in a nutshell, the fight or flight syndrome, which you guys are very familiar with from pharmacology. So we get our sympathetic nervous system jumping right on, and sympathetic and parasympathetic. So it's our fight or flight syndrome. Now, he's also got a general adaptation syndrome, which is commonly referred to as GAS, general adaptation syndrome, the GAS. It has 3 distinct phases. So we have our alarm reaction stage, which is our initial fight or flight syndrome response. That's initiated when we go and take off running, and our blood pressure raises, and our pupils dilate to see everything while we're running away from that bear, and our heart speeds up, and our intestines and everything slow down. So all of that happens in that initial alarm reaction stage. Then we have our stage of resistance. So using the physiological responses of the first stage, the person attempts to basically adapt to that stressor. And if the adaptation occurs, the third stage is prevented or delayed, and then physiological symptoms may actually disappear. So this is kind of being able to adapt to things. So this would be with anxiety or regular stressors. So if we're go to a haunted house and we're dealt with initial scare, we're going to have our fight or flight response, right? But if we're constantly living that haunted house day after day, our body tries to build a stage of resistance or adapt to what's going on. Now, if we're able to adapt, then we don't go on to the third stage. But if our body's not able to adapt at all, then we move on to the stage of exhaustion, where the adaptive energy is depleted and diseases of adaptation may ensue. So our biological responses associated with the fight or flight can include immediate responses, so like the release of norepinephrine and the biological or the epinephrine, increased respiration rate, increased heart rate, things like that. And then we have sustained responses like an increase in glucogenesis or increased basal metabolic rate or decrease in secretion of sex hormones during that stage of exhaustion. Okay, so eventually um, you start running out of energy to keep running from the bear or keep screaming, in that haunted house if you're living that haunted house day in and day out. Okay. So let's check your understanding. So stress as a biological response. A 25-year-old man barely avoids a motor vehicle accident. His heart is pounding, his palms are sweaty, and his respirations are increased. This is an example of which stage of the general adaptation syndrome. Is it A, alarm reaction stage, B, stage of resistance, C, stage of exhaustion, or D, stage of biological stress? All right, so the correct answer here was A, it's the physiological response to fight or flight syndrome that's initiated by the alarm reaction stage of the general adaptation syndrome. So the physiological responses generally include an increase in heart rate and respirations and may include other symptoms such as a headache or sweaty palms or sensation of dizziness. All right, so let's continue with those physical responses, if I can talk. All right, biological responses associated with fight or flight. So this immediate response is stimulation of the sympathetic nervous system that can result in that dilation of pupils, the dilation of those bronchioles, and increased respiration rate, so you can get all the oxygen in while you're running away from the bear. Increased force of cardiac contraction, which causes an increased cardiac output and increased heart rate and increased blood pressure. We have a decrease of the gastric motility and secretions, an increase of secretion from the sweat glands, and then there's lots of other responses. All right, so sustained physical responses to stress occur after a prolonged period of stress and promote susceptibility to many disease adaptations. So basically, after a prolonged period of stress, so stress just does not go away. You're living that haunted house day in and day out, or you work a job that's very stressful day in and day out. Then you may have these effects. So the pituitary gland usually releases a number of hormones that can cause a range of effects. So like an increase in glucogenesis and retention gives you retention of sodium and water. A decrease in immune and inflammatory response, and that's a common effect that happens. So someone gets sick more often. They may have fluid retention. They could have increased blood pressure, or they could have increased basal metabolic rate. So it can affect your vasopressin or your thyrotropic hormones or your ACTH. Again, those are long-term effects. Psychological responses. So anxiety and grief is a psychological response to stress. There is a variety of thoughts and feelings and behaviors associated with these responses, and they may vary depending on the individual and life experiences. But adaptation is determined by a degree to which these thoughts, feelings, and behaviors interfere with an individual's level of functioning. Okay. So anxiety. This is a vague nature of the associated feelings. Um, it's a diffuse apprehension that is, like I said, vague in nature and associated with feelings of uncertainty and helplessness. So there's not really a spot on place for it. It's extremely common in our society. Mild anxiety is adaptive and can provide a motivation for survival. So if you're put in stressful situation, it's kind of survival mode. Um, nearly everybody feels anxiety in some way. There are varying levels of degrees of anxiety, and it can become problematic if the individual is unable to prevent it from interfering with their everyday life. So we have to learn to adapt, or uh, we cease to live, essentially. All right, so let's look at Papelo's 4 levels of anxiety. Um, so these are 4 levels of anxiety and their effects on the individual. So the mild anxiety prepares people for action. It sharpens the senses, increases motivation for productivity, increases the perceptual field, and results in a heightened awareness of the environment. So when I'm running away from the bear, learning is enhanced, and an individual is able to function at his or her optimal level. And then our moderate anxiety is extended. Their perceptual field diminishes. Individual becomes less alert to events occurring within the environment. Attention span and ability to concentrate decreases, and assistance with problem solving may be required. And then there's an increase in muscular tension and restlessness. Now, severe anxiety, the perceptual field diminishes greatly. Concentration centers on one particular detail only, or many extraneous details. Attention span is extremely limited. The individual has much difficulty completing even the simplest tasks. Physical symptoms may include headaches, palpitations, and insomnia. Emotional symptoms may include confusion, dread, and horror. And then virtually all overt behaviors aimed at relieving the anxiety. And then finally, we have panic anxiety. So individual is unable to focus on even one detail within the environment, not even one. They have misperceptions that are common, and a loss of contact with reality may actually occur. Hallucinations or delusions may be present during that time. Behavior may be characterized by a wild and desperate action or extreme withdrawal. Human functioning and communication with others are ineffective at this time. Individuals may be conceived that they have life-threatening illness, or fear that they're going crazy or losing control. They're emotionally weak. Uh, Prolonged panic anxiety can lead to physical and emotional exhaustion and can be life-threatening. It can literally kill you if it goes on for a long period of time. All right, behavioral adaptation responses to anxiety. So individuals adapt at a mild level of anxiety. Coping mechanisms such as sleeping, drinking, cursing, and finger tapping are pretty common um, at this time. So that those are just things that people can do to help them to adapt. Um, Unresolved moderate to severe anxiety can contribute to physiological disorders, including cardiovascular, gastrointestinal, neoplastic, neurological, and pulmonary conditions. Extended periods of repressed severe anxiety can lead to psychoneurotic responses, such as anxiety disorders or somatic symptom disorders or dissociative disorders. And common characteristics of individuals with neurosis can include that they're aware that they're experiencing distress, they are aware that their behaviors are maladaptive, but they may be unaware of any possible psychological cause of the distress. They sometimes feel helpless to change their situation, and they could experience no loss of contact at, with reality at that time. Unresolved panic anxiety can result in psychosis, which is significant thought disturbances in which reality testing really is impaired. Individuals may experience delusions or hallucinations or disorganized speech or catatonic behaviors. Some examples of psychotic responses to anxiety include like schizophrenic or schizoaffective or delusional disorders. And that's it for this PowerPoint slide.